So I wrote a post on, I blog for Prof Hacker at the Chronicle. I wrote a post a couple of weeks ago about how I use water bottles theatrically in my classes. This is designed for when I get... Oh, yeah. Speaking of theatrical, this is nice. Let me tell you about how I use this water bottle, ladies and gentlemen. This is what I use when I want to distract my students because they ask me something I don't know the answer to, or I want to force them to think and answer the question before I do. So that's what that's for. I'll go to it on occasion. I'd like to thank the Calvin Smith Library and especially Roger for inviting me to present today, and for Cheryl for all of her help getting me here. I noticed with interest, I was requested, I'm being recorded, I was requested to fill out a media release form. And one of the things on there is I promised to say nothing defamatory and to do nothing obscene, which is unfortunate because I have a great pair of rip-away pants that I've been waiting to use at a presentation, and that will just, you'll have to look for that at some other venue, I suppose. As I was batting around ideas for a title of a talk, the Tragicomedy of the Commons, which is sort of terrible to say, ended up feeling the most appropriate to do. So as you may know, a tragedy is a literary genre that tends to involve important people, a progression from good to bad, and often some sort of suffering. On the other hand, a comedy tends to involve less important people, a progression from bad to good, and pie. So a tragicomedy, on the other hand, is a sort of unholy mix of the two. It's kind of like digital and scholarship, perhaps, or collaboration in scholarship. So that's where I sort of ended on the title. So in talking about our experience with digital scholarship in and around Emory's library, I'll touch on both the tragic and the comic. But, spoiler perhaps, you might be able to tell since I'm not all that important, you've never seen me before, the end of the story is probably going to be more about happiness rather than hamartia. So, and while we're talking about tragedies and commonses, you're probably familiar with the basic idea of the tragedy of the commons. So this is me bombing the Flickr commons to look for things that have been Creative Commons tagged of images of commonses in England. So the tragedy of the commons is the concept, the depletion of a shared resource by individuals who have no reason not to use as much of the commons as possible. If everyone acts in their own self-interest, the commons gets used up. And it turns out that my story today starts with a tragedy at the center of a commons that's pretty familiar to many of us here today, the library. And in particular, not this very beautiful library, but Emory's library, the Woodruff Library. So research and teaching at Emory has been sort of, we've had a long history for the last really 20 years of doing interesting work on digital research, digital teaching. And a lot of those projects have had a home somehow in the library. Some of them relatively recent examples have included the Transatlantic Slave Trade Voyages database, which is a sort of amazing piece of scholarship by the same researcher, David Eltis, who's just retiring from history. Also the African Names Origin database, if you want to look at names of enslaved persons and where they came from. The Southern Spaces Journal, one of our online journals of American South, and then a project that got more attention that unfortunately, due to copyright, I can't get images of, when we took Salman Rushdie's computers and made an emulation of them. We have his computers in the collection. You can come up to our special collections and pull up a virtual environment of his computers. We have other projects that have been ongoing for longer. The Emory Women's Writers Project, a 1990s text recovery project for novels from women that had been more or less ignored. Some projects on postcards from the Great War, and so on and so forth. Now, it turns out that the library, a place like this, is a perfect place to do digital scholarship, in large part because it tends to be neutral ground on campus. It's where people are already going to be coming. It's a place where you don't have a particular department feeling a sense of ownership. Everyone should feel a sense of ownership in the library, and this is why colleges and provosts should make sure they include libraries in their ways and means budgets. So it's not so much a no man's land, but again, the library is a commons. And unfortunately, in the case of Emory, what we were missing is there was no clear way for you to get involved. If you wanted to come to our library and you wanted to do a project similar to the ones we'd already done, there was no front door for you to go to. There was no place to get started with digital scholarship, no place to walk in to say, I've got an idea, what can you do to help me out? So instead of a front door, what we actually had, it worked a bit more like entrances to a secret cave or a grotto. You had to know the right way, you had to know the right people, and you had to know the password in order to get started in this sort of work. Or, if it wasn't this sort of backdoor secret way in, the other possibility is that people would start building projects on their own, out in the university, in the history department. This is what happened with the Voyages project. As David Elsa started, he got a grant, then he got a couple more grants, he started building something, and then eventually, when the projects get to a certain point in the middle of the night, they get dropped off on the library steps. Like a little unwanted cat. Oh no. It got truncated, yeah. Pretend that that makes more sense. So, of course, when you have either a secret grotto situation or an unboxed Schrodinger moment, the resources that end up being devoted to a project end up being uncoordinated. The reason they're uncoordinated is because you don't know that they're coming. And things that are uncoordinated in a large organization, as is the case on a library, tend to be unsustainable. That was the best I could do for unsustainable. Think about the Cheetos. So they're unsustainable in a couple of different ways. In the first place, if you don't know how many projects are coming, you can't prepare. You can't budget your time or your staff in order to be ready for them when the projects come in. And the tricky thing is with scholarship is if the project is good enough, if it's important enough, the library will sort of be compelled by the university to take it in. And that's a good thing. Important scholarship needs to be preserved. It needs to be made available to other scholars, to the world. That's what libraries, that's what universities do. So this is a good thing, but it makes it really hard for a library to do it and to know how to budget for these sorts of things. And so this becomes the sort of classic definition of a tragedy of the commons, when there's an uncoordinated use of resources by being done through self-interest. And in the second place, sort of to come back here, the other problem with these projects being dropped off and why it's unsustainable is the library can't preserve things that haven't been designed to be preserved. Issues like metadata, copyright, permissions, the sorts of things that matter very deeply to librarians are things that scholars are not always concerned about and probably shouldn't be so concerned about. That's not necessarily their place. But it's harder to undo that work that's already been done in the digital space. You can't just necessarily go in and add a couple of citations and it fixes it. So again, our problems that we were looking at Emory, sustainability, secret grottos, and doorstep cats. And all of this, again, sort of emblematic of the tragedy of the commons. So how do you get from a tragedy of the commons to something that's sustainable and usable? You get a front door, again. One place for people to start and to benefit from a coordinated use of the commons. And at Emory, we've called this front door the Digital Scholarship Commons, DISC. This is where I work. But before you get too comfortable with this as a solution, before you start naming things DISC and saying, OK, we're done. Yeah, DISC, right? It's spelled wrong. we're pretty proud. It actually makes sense. There was a while that people were thinking of D-Hub, the digital hub, which was just sort of terrible. Although I'm waiting for Skrillex to release some D-Hub stuff, and then maybe it might be better. But it turns out, we had this first tragedy. It turns out there's another problem to talk about. So instead of the too crowded and depleted commons, what we found is that sometimes people don't actually want to make use of the commons. So on one hand, you have everybody crowding in, putting their virtual cows on our farm and eating all of our grass. In the other case, nobody wants to come and play. They take their toys and simply go home. Sometimes people just don't see the value in collaborating. So I've got an instructive experience to relate to one of our current projects, which is called Networking Belfast. So we're fortunate in our libraries. We have a lot of modern Irish poetry in special collections. We have the papers, or some of the papers of Seamus Heaney and Michael Longley, Yeats, other people, Derek Mann. So one of the I'm going to tell you two different ways of understanding this project. I have the normal person version, and I have the metadata librarian version. So the normal person version, which is not to say metadata librarians are not normal, by the way. They're just special. What we have is we have a lot of finding aids of all of this material, and we have the collections of the correspondence of these poets talking to each other. In the 1960s, Heaney, Hobsbawm, Mann, Michael Longley, all are working in Belfast together. They are doing weekly or bi-weekly workshops on their poetry. Each poet would bring a couple of pages of poetry, of drafts of poems, share them with the other poets, get feedback, and they did this for 5 or 6 years throughout the 60s. So we have correspondence of a lot of these poets. We also have the worksheets, the group sheets. There's different names for them, but basically the mimeographed poems. And so the thing that we're interested in is in trying to connect the poets to each other through their work. One of the vexatious things about the Belfast group is the poets are sort of split on how important this thing was for them. Some of them think it's really important, others deny ever having really been a part of it. And so the idea of the Belfast group as a thing, this thing that people write books about, is really sort of strange and mixed up. So we have the letters. We have, of course, then addresses and people that are being written to. We can draw connections between them. We can look at essentially the social network of the poets. And we can also look at the poems. Some of them are dedicated to other people, other poets in the group. Sometimes they reference other people in the poems themselves. They talk about places in Ulster, in Belfast, in the different areas. So we are taking all of this information that's in the poems. We are linking the poets to each other based on how frequently they talk to each other, how frequently they write. We're creating visualizations of the maps, the places that are being talked about, the places in which the poets lived and worked. And we're making all of this public. So that's the normal version of it. The metadata, and this is essentially one of our early visualizations. I couldn't get the labels on here, it wouldn't make any sense. But essentially, one of the things that's really fascinating that we would learn, and I didn't put both of them on here, but traditional scholars have understood the network in one particular way, putting the actual concept of network, if we graph it out, becomes a big hub on our graph. It happens to be over here, but it's along this size. Once we actually break it, based on our data, the network shows that, in this case, it's Paul Muldoon and Seamus Heaney here. The actual concept of Belfast Group as a network becomes this sort of small hub. And so this is not truth. This is based upon our collections. It's based upon preliminary data. But it's showing a very different story about the Belfast Group and the way they were connected to one another. We also find people way out to the side. One of the things about the Belfast Group is there was only one woman that was sort of tangentially involved in the group. We're finding that Heaney's wife, for example, becomes a part of the larger Belfast Group network. It's helping us tell a different story. So here's the Here, what we're actually doing, because this is a project that was developed by one of our software engineers in the library, who also has a PhD in English, is what she was interested in. She saw all these finding aids, which are encode archival data, and we had TEI versions of the poems. She said, you know what, we could take this information, we could take all of the names, and let me find one on here. You know, we could take Edmund Wilson. We could create a series of scripts to automatically go through and tag all of the entities with named authority files. So we have scripts and we have a plugin for the Oxygen TEI editor that are actually the real thrust of the project that we've made, that you could take any of your EAD here for special collections, any TEI you have, and run the scripts on them and get back named entities. And that allows us to expose this metadata to create linked open data. So not only can we do this work, but by July 1st, you should be able to come to our website, scrape the data, and do your own analyses of these things. The software is open source. It's available for people to download and play with themselves and improve upon. And the Belfast group is simply a proving ground, a way to test for what we're doing. It's a nice use case. But the scripts, we hope at some point to be able to actually take all of our special collections and show how they relate to each other. Because it turns out finding aids are not actually really good tools for research. I've done archival research before. They're great for describing collections. There's a purpose for them, but they're really hard sometimes to see how they connect to other things in the library. So my sort of fantasy dream is an actual big network graph that shows how everything in our particular collection are related to each other. It's a sort of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon sort of moment. So that's our project. I'm the project manager, and I'm working with, as I said, the software developer who also has a PhD in English. Neither of us did our work on Irish poetry. And so we approached one of our colleagues in the English department, and I will not name this person. And we said, you know, we're sort of concerned. We're doing this work. We want to be sure that we're not making any sort of bad assumptions, that if we really knew our subject matter, if we knew the content, things that we wouldn't actually ask or things that would that we should know, so that we don't sort of go around making fools of ourselves. And this is why we wanted some faculty input. We wanted to get a partner in this project. And what this person said when we asked if he or she would be interested in working with us is, "What's in it for me?" And it's taken me about 3 months to realize that this is actually, if we want to talk about exploring collaboration in digital scholarship, this is the #1 question we have to answer. What's in it for me? This is actually, as much as this seems like a terrible thing to say to somebody who's saying, will you help me on a project? It turns out this is actually a really rational response. Faculty, it seems, are actually rational people. They have a lot to do. They've got a lot of pressures on them. It turns out that this is the case for graduate students and also librarians. We are all very busy people. We all have jobs to do. And if I don't know what's in it for me, there is no reason for me to help you out. Unfortunately, we have to confront the fact that, pretend you didn't see that. That scholarship generally has, to this point, been conceived as a sort of act of solitary genius. This is the way, at least in the humanities side of things, and even the way we understand our received knowledge of the history of science kind of works this way. We talk about Newton. We don't talk about Newton's lab and the people he was working with. And so even if we are aware that this is a historical construct of the way that we understand knowledge creation to work, it still has a lot to do with how the university works. When you go up for tenure, if you're a faculty member, people care about what you did. And that's what they're evaluating. If you are going up for a tenure or a contract renewal, if you're a librarian, it's the same sort of thing. And so what this means is that we need to realize a very important and embarrassingly self-obvious truth that you've never seen before. That collaboration, it turns out, is not an end in and of itself. You have to have a reason to do it. You need to figure out how to make what you were trying to do worth everyone's time. It takes creativity to do this up front. It takes knowing what you want out of a project. I think a classic example in the digital humanities is a lot of times people like myself, we will say, you know what, we don't actually, if I admit to myself, that I don't actually know a whole lot about how computers work. I can't write my own software. Maybe I could partner with somebody in computer science. And it turns out that a lot of times people in computer science, unless you can make an interesting research question for them, there is no reason for them to participate with you. You have to make it worth their time. So what we've discovered in DISC, in the Digital Scholarship Commons then, is that Vanilla Ice actually had it totally backwards. It's not, we do not stop, collaborate, and listen, but instead we should stop, listen, and then probably collaborate. And the sound was, actually supposed to play the song, so I'm sort of sorry that you don't get to hear that. And then I was going to do the dance. And that's what the rip-away pants were for, so I'm sorry. So what do faculty need? This is something I've been trying to spend a lot of time thinking about. In general, what faculty need for anything is to help them advance a research agenda and or help them teach a class better than they currently are. That's what faculty members need. What do grad students need? Haircuts. Yeah. So what graduate students need, they actually have a wider range of things that they can make something worth their time. They need experience in a field, perhaps. They need experience, and so the field could be their subject field and doing research in it. Perhaps experience in a methodology. In my case, that's digital humanities they might be looking for. Grad students need money a lot of times. They need experience getting a project off the ground, something that will help them when they're writing that job letter in the future or applying for a fellowship to say, I have done something concrete, I've been part of a team. What do librarians need? They need better t-shirts. It really sort of depends in some part on the structure of the librarian's job. Again, if the library in which you're working is a tenure model, if it's a faculty equivalent model, if it's simply contract. So what you actually need might change a little bit. But one of the things that I think most librarians want, especially subject librarians, is a closer relationship to a department with which they work, a way to feel that they are helping the scholars that they are working with, and to improve those relationships. And sometimes I think librarians also what they need or want is a seat at the table, not a reminder to the rest of the world that they are scholars themselves, but maybe that's what it is, maybe a recognition. This is something that we've really been trying to do at Emory. But it also turns out that it's not just about people that you get involved in collaboration. We have to think again about the organization. So what does a library need to make it worth collaboration? In the case, again, what a library really wants is the ability to preserve something a lot of times. It needs metadata, usable formats. It needs to make sense for the organization, to have it fit the sort of larger institutional missions. And in this way, if a project can highlight your collections, the things that really make your library unique or your institution unique, all the better. And then finally, in our case, what does DISC need? When I'm sitting down to work on a project with somebody, in this, it's really easy. I need projects because that's what we're generously funded by the Mellon Foundation. We told them we'd do projects. I have to have projects or they take their money back, as well they should. So one model for how we've tried to do this at DISC is our project, The Views of Rome. So here I'm going to, again, sort of tell you in sort of perhaps excruciating detail, but try to extract general principles from it, how we've tried to go about helping people understand what's in it for them. So the way this project started in fall of 2011. Eric Varner and Sarah McPhee in our art history department. Eric works on classical Rome. Sarah works on Renaissance and Baroque Rome. They came to, what they wanted to do was to create a research platform for their classes. That was one. Two, they're sort of mercenary, and they wanted to get more Roman materials purchased for our special collections. So here's another thing that the faculty sometimes might have extra motives than the one I'd already thought about. We have a small collection of Roman materials. They want more. And so they said, well, if we can show off some of the stuff we already have, maybe that will convince the library we should invest more in here. In particular, they wanted to work with the amazing 1561 Piro Ligorio map that we had recently acquired for special collections. So these are 2 plates of a 12-plate map. Each plate is approximately 2 by 2 feet, all laid out together. They are conference table size, so it's a very large map. To our understanding, there are only 2 institutions in the United States that own a copy, and Princeton was stupid and stitched theirs together, or maybe it wasn't them, but their copy is stitched together. That makes it hard to work with. You can't really scan a massive map. And so this was the object they wanted to work about. I am sort of in love with this thing. It's an amazing thing to see up close. This is kind of how I feel every time I look at it. And so Eric Varner, Sarah McPhee, they approached the library, and specifically the art history librarian, and said, we understand there's this new digital scholarship thing happening in the library. We kind of want to do something with the map. What can you do to help us? So it was great that they started not coming to DISC, but they started with their subject librarian and talking also with the rare books librarian who was in charge of acquiring in this case, in this area. They came and chatted with me as a project manager and said, well, we want to do something. What can we do? What we then did is we sat down, we started having bi-weekly meetings. This is in September of 2011. Bi-weekly meetings in which we looked at what they wanted to accomplish, what their goals were. We looked at other projects that had already been done on Rome. There's a lot of digital work that has been done on Rome, and tried to think about what could distinguish our work. And what we eventually decided is that Ligorio's map is a sort of amazing. He makes a map in 1561, but it's a map of 3rd century classical Rome. And so Ligorio had to go around the city, and he could see things like the Colloquium that was still standing largely, and he could sketch from that. But other buildings like the Septizodium here were no longer existed. So he would do historical, archaeological research to construct this map. He would look at coins, he would look at frescoes, friezes. And so this map represents the collapsing down of all of this historical research into one document. It turns out that Ligorio got some stuff wrong. Coins were not always actually accurate to what the buildings had been in the past. And so today we know more about some of these areas in Rome than Ligorio did. And so what we were hoping to do is to create a platform where we could sort of explode this knowledge back outwards to sort of show the places where we now know more or know differently from Ligorio. So that was the sort of goal, to simultaneously create this platform for their students to work on, and again to sort of show off some of the materials alongside the Ligorio that we had in collections. So once we sort of hit on something that was interesting and that made sense and that met the faculty's needs, the librarian's needs, to again show off part of our collections, and my needs as something that it was a project, it seemed a viable thing, it hadn't been done before, it was something that I thought we had the technical capability to do. We then sat down and wrote a project proposal. And this was a requirement for getting funding from DISC. So a proposal had to be written, but all 5 of us wrote different portions of the proposal. The proposal was about 8 to 10 pages. The faculty, for example, were in charge of talking about the digital humanities impact and what impact this would have on their scholarship. The librarians tackled questions of metadata, of copyright, of permissions for all of the different materials we were going to be using. I had to handle the technical details. I created wireframes for some of the proposed websites. The project then went to a selection committee, which in our process to this point has been made up of faculty and librarians, a sort of peer review. Myself and my colleague that we run DISC, we don't get to decide, and we think that's good because it allows us to be really enthusiastic about the different projects that we're trying to get off the ground. Somebody else in the university, scholars, help us make that decision. So once the project was approved, we discovered something that's been true of all DISC projects to date, and I would bet almost any long-range project in a university, there's still more planning to do. You think you've written this proposal, you have sweated it and given it blood and tears for 6 weeks, and it turns out there's lots more work to be done. So the first thing that we had to plan on is figure out how do we digitize the map. Now, and also the different rare books that we'd be using in the collection. So the rare books librarian here created a list of the different books we had in the collection. The faculty sat down, they prioritized the list, said these are the ones that we think are most important, we need to have access to right away to use in the work we want to do. And then I met and discussed the technical details with our head of digitization services. So now it wasn't just a 5-person team, suddenly we brought in a 6th person who had, and again, I had to answer the question of what's in it for you. In the case of our digitization team, they want to digitize everything. That's sort of their job. They have a big queue of things that they are working on, and I had to figure out what's your timeline, how can we get our project in, have it make sense for you, and giving them deadlines, and allowing them to give us deadlines so that we would recognize that they had other work that they were doing. So at this point, let me just sort of talk about some sort of tips for managing large group of collaborators, because I think this is one of the things, I've spent all of my time after graduate school, which admittedly has only been 5 years, but thinking about the things that graduate school did not actually teach me to do, that I do in my daily work. One of the things is really how to manage large group of collaborators. Again, we don't teach people to do that very well in universities, I think, in traditional graduate school training. So an important thing that I would say for anybody getting started on a collaboration is to have a sort of kickoff meeting, is to try and get your team together and figure out what is it we are trying to do. And then to do what I like to call the recitation of the epic poem of the project. To sort of start like Homer and with some wine dark seas and go back and say, here is what we're doing. And to then allow other people at the table to say, you know what, that's not actually what I thought we were doing. I thought we were doing this other thing. And I like to have at most of my project meetings, again, a sort of recitation of the epic poem as often as possible. And sometimes I like to ask somebody else to tell it, just to check in and make sure that we know what it is we think we're doing, to make sure there hasn't been any scope creep in the project, and to make sure that everybody's happy with what we're doing. Making sure everybody knows who each other are and what place they play in the project is important, and emphasizing again what everyone is hoping to get out of it. It's also important to find out which way people like best to communicate. I like to have everything sent to my email box because that way I know where it is. It turns out that I have colleagues that I work with that would really rather get a phone call or would rather have me come and talk with them in person. I don't ever want you to come and talk with me. I'm not a very nice person. If I can just sit at my desk and send emails to you, I will do that. But other people feel differently, and my job as a project manager is not to make people bend to my will, but to figure out how to help other people be successful in their work. After an initial meeting or two, it's important to realize that in a large group of collaborators, you don't actually have to meet together every time. You will probably be better off and get more done if you meet only with the most critical group of people for whatever you are trying to do for that meeting. You should probably have regular meetings, because if you're not, you are probably not making regular progress on a project. But everyone will love you more if you do not have a meeting, if there's no point to it. Recognize up front that you should have an agenda for a meeting. You should have goals for why you are having a meeting and what you're trying to get done. And then to end each of these meetings with a list of assignments. And if you need to tattoo them on people, that would be perfectly acceptable. So another place where, in the Rome project, where we started getting the digitization going, once we really were planning, instead of me drawing wireframes, we had to pull in our software development team to consult with them. Then the manager of the team had consulted with us during the writing of the proposal, just to make sure I wasn't committing us to magical unicorns and things like that. But now we brought in the actual designer that was going to do the work. We had another person that we needed to bring into the team and to think about what is it that a software developer wants. So here are the things that I think software developers want. Number one, they want clear instructions about what you are hoping that they will do. I'm seeing some head nodding back there. This is one of the really hard things for me, coming from writing a dissertation, writing scholarly articles that I can spend months on. I don't often know where I'm going when I start. That's no way to actually do development. If you say to a developer, it's going to kind of look like that. They can't make something that kind of looks like something. But they also want the freedom and the flexibility to take the best technical path to get there, to give them a sense of here's what the end goal is, but you should be able to figure out what the best technology, what the best platform is for getting there. Two other things that developers want. They are like the rest of us, something new and interesting to do for them, not just asking them to make you another pretty website with CSS, and something that could be useful for their portfolio. They're professionals as well. They're working to move ahead in their career. So our project meetings with this now, at this point, it was a group of 7 or 8 people, became a place to sort of check in regularly about the progress and getting feedback on the process of development. The next thing that we had to do is we had to actually start testing the system that we created. A faculty member sat down and wrote an article for us about the Amphitheatrum Castrense, so the Amphitheater Castrense, which is in the, it's in the northeast corner of the map, but the map is not actually oriented northeast, so I don't actually know Rome very well. So Eric Varner, he was going to be using it in a class this fall 2012. He identified a series of monuments that he would have his students write articles about in the class. And then he wrote the first article to give us an example. We then brought in a graduate student, so one more person. Her motivation was money, and she works on Rome herself. She was one of Eric's graduate students. So she had the content knowledge. Eric had given us a list of the different monuments he wanted to do. She had the content knowledge to actually look at the map and say it's this, this, and this, something that I and my other project conspirators, including the librarians, couldn't do just because it's not our areas of expertise. She also learned how to use the system, the back end, to start putting in the article, to find out all of the places where WordPress was really not friendly for art historians who care very much about the placement of objects on a page in relation to text. Turns out that's not something WordPress cares really a lick about. And to help us think through, as we were iterating designs, how that was going to, how to change it. Finally, at the end of working on this all throughout the last summer, the graduate student Katie and I sat down and we wrote up step-by-step instructions for the class, which she was actually going to be co-teaching with Eric Varner, on how the students were going to accomplish this assignment they were going to do. The subject librarian then created a list of all of the different resources that we had in the library. So can I do this? There we go. There it is. Look at that. That's our website. We got corporate sponsorship. So I'm going to turn off the outlays really quickly. So here's the map. Again, we digitized it. Then we put it in. We use this a Microsoft tool called Deep Zoom instead of using Flash because it allows us to very easily go in and out. And so here's one of the things that's just amazing about the level of detail that our digitization team was able to achieve. Also the level of detail on Ligorio's map. I should go and figure out exactly how big the actual plates were that he printed from. You can see more detail on this map in our digital interface than you could with the map in front of you. I mean, you could pull out a magnifying glass, but it would be really hard, and the map has been encapsulated in Mylar to help preserve it. So this is really the best way to explore a really amazing document. It's just a beautiful thing. And that was goal number one, is just to make this interface so people could really get the most out of it. We then added, one of the first things we did is that Microsoft Deep Zoom only allows you to draw quadrilateral hot links around things. It makes it really hard to work with polygonal shaped items. And so our developer came up with a map interface manager, and then our grad student, she drew all of these overlays on top of the different parts of the map to make it easier to see the different things in the city. And these are just the first series of monuments that Eric had identified to have students work on. This is the article on the Castrense. We solved the problem about images by putting in a slider up here. And if you click on them, you get a lot more detail and more information about the metadata that is important for a project like this. This sort of scholarly article, and then a list of citations, but also all of the different sources if you want to see. The project is called Views of Rome because we're hoping to eventually highlight the fact that all of these monuments are understood differently at different points in time. So you can look in the 19th century in our collection of Baedeker travel guides and read some things about the Castrense, and it's going to be understood differently than it was in the sort of High Renaissance and in the Baroque periods. So it's a handy reference to get to everything. So that's sort of the finished product at the moment. So one of the, if I was going to identify, we figured out what everybody needed, what everybody wanted for the project. One of the challenges was the fact that we ended up doing a lot of work over the summer, and it turns out that faculty who work on Rome tend to go to Rome in the summer. And I can't really blame them. It was a much nicer place to be than working with me. But it made it hard to get some of the work done. And so knowing ahead of time, if you were, when you're planning to collaborate with people, what schedules are going to be like. And to get the faculty to, what I saw as the timeline in which I wanted things to get done didn't make sense always to the faculty members, again, because the things that I privileged, which was get the project done, was different from what they were privileging, which was, I want this ready in time for the semester, but the semester is 3 months off, and so this is not an important thing for me. At the moment, I'm trying to get my research done and teach my class in Italy. So let's switch back to here. So again, I should have inserted the slide here one more time. But what's in it for me? Really, I think, is the rule for collaboration in general, but in particular digital collaboration. So the initial tragedy of the Commons that we'd been sort of experiencing, again, was this problem of doorstep cats. And it turns out we've made some progress to solving that. It's not fixed entirely. The library is still not, the university as a whole has not yet figured out exactly the right way to do everything with digital scholarship, but we have a front door now. We have a place where people can come. And so that's a useful thing to do. is increasing amounts of institutional will. And we are trying to get the provost's office and the deans of the college and the graduate school to help us solidify that sort of institutional will for doing that. But once we had the front door in place, the larger problem we found was the question of what does it mean to collaborate, how to collaborate in a way that's beneficial for everyone that's involved, and to help scholars and to help ourselves, again, become disinterestedly self-interested, to be aware that we all had something in it. So it turns out collaboration in the library, at a university, as it does at almost any place, involves some sort of imagination and figuring out what you might be able to do with each other, and to respect everyone involved for the contributions that they bring. Along these lines, I do want to call out just very quickly late-breaking news. Last week, the MLA, the Committee on Information Technology at the MLA, released a set of revised guidelines for informational technology, access, and support for the modern languages, which is a terrible title. And I can say that because I sit on this committee. So the seven of us, we revised some guidelines that had been around since since 1999, and then we sent them up the chain. So these do represent the MLA. One of the things that in this document, it calls out the responsibility of departments and institutions to provide IT access and support for all, to create an IT infrastructure that's responsive to the needs of faculty members. And I should be able to click on this and actually bring up the website. Let's see if it works. And down here, recognize that adapting to and adopting new IT is a non-trivial task. I think this is actually one of the most important things, is just pointing out if we want our faculty and our students to do new and interesting things, we can't expect them to necessarily do them on the same schedule that we've expected them to do it in the past. Creating a large digital project is not the same thing as creating a book. Doesn't mean it's better or worse, but it is different, and we haven't been training people to do this, really. And we also shouldn't be compelling faculty or students to do these things. But as exciting as all of these things are for scholars, what I'm most proud of is a completely new section we added at the end of the document. The previous bits were for departments and institutions. Here, under responsibilities of scholars of the modern languages, we call for the recognition of academic technology staff members as vital collaborators, recognizing that if you are going to be working with other people in the institution, that you need to see them not as little servants, but as people with lives and research interests of their own. And I think this free spirit of collaboration, this free spirit of generosity that we're hoping to invoke here, can be beneficial. Let's get back to sort of similar. If the MLA is not your particular cup of tea, there was a workshop sponsored by the NEH this was in January of 2011 at the University of Maryland, an exploration of career paths for faculty or scholars off the tracks, off the tenure track, sort of exploration of alternative academic careers. One of the documents that came out of this was the Collaborators' Bill of Rights, a sort of initial discussion of here's a recognition of the problem that sometimes in projects it can be hard to give people credit for the different work they've done, and a suggestion and a series of suggestions about how we should be giving that credit. And again, if we are thinking up front about how to be giving credit, we should be thinking about why people would be involved in it in the first place. So at the end of the day, I would say that DISC, the Digital Scholarship Commons, is still a little bit tragic at times. We're still learning to build something new and different in the heart of a university library, which is perhaps the most conservative part of an already conservative enterprise of the modern university. But on the whole, we have moved to a better place than where we've started, There hasn't been any marriages, which would traditionally end a comedy. But we're in a better place than where we started. There have been some laughs along the way. And this means, in the end, that we do, in fact, look a tiny bit more like a comedy than a tragedy. So, thanks. It says I talked for about 60 minutes. But if you'd like me to talk some more, I would be happy to answer questions. Or if you'd like me to sit down, you can just sort of be quiet, and then I will. Sir?
Why the map? Why did you purchase the map for your special collection? Did you already have? You said you had a little bit of Rome stuff, but why stretch that far into something like that artifact?
So I'm going to repeat the question because I've been told it's not being recorded. So the question was why the map? Why did we go buy that if we already had some Rome collections? The map had already been purchased before we started the project. So that was really the faculty members. I don't know what deals they had to cut to get them to buy that map. And it was a joint purchase between our library and our campus art museum, which has an emphasis on classical and pre-modern art. So the map had been purchased, and they just wanted to do something with it, but have been trying to push since this point on saying, look at what this cool and interesting thing we did with this one map. Now let's buy more. So that's where it's at. The projects, our project budgets for this project was only $4,000. But that does not include staff time. We had a year, for 4 projects, we had 2 FTEs of developer time dedicated, and that was by far the most expensive thing to do. We found, however, in doing this project that we've spent maybe $400 on graduate student time. We thought we were going to have to buy some special software. We ended up not having to do so. Far more important than money in the projects we've done so far is time. Getting a faculty member or staff member's time is very expensive, and we did not have the budget for course buyouts. And so that's been sometimes a challenge, I guess. Amanda?
So at the Institute for Advanced Technology and the Humanities at UVA, where Lisa and I used to do, they had a kind of a faculty fellowship model where faculty were asked to come up with a project proposal that they could do at IAC. It sounds from what you're talking about as though DISC is almost doing its own things with the library resources and then kind of collaborating with faculty on more of an ad hoc basis. Is that right?
That is correct. So the question was about IATH, which was at the Institute for Advanced Technology and the Humanities at the University of Virginia, one of the first digital humanity labs, 1992, 3, thereabouts, John Unsworth, and a couple of other people. We actually set up our model to be very much in opposition to IATH. As we saw it, IATH was they did some amazing projects. They tended to be very boutique and were not sustainable, could not be built upon. And there was not always technologies that could be pulled out and reused. So we wanted to run in the other direction. From those fellowships for faculty were 1 or 2 years, sort of incredibly expensive, and not from people we had talked to at Virginia and other places. The feeling was that was perhaps an early model and not a sustainable model for doing scholarship. So we have tried to do something else. Now, we are making some changes in how we're doing things. Our new model of collaboration, you guys are the first to hear this. In a public setting, at least. What we're planning right now is, because we found that faculty projects during the school year don't work especially well if we can't buy out your time, because you, as a faculty member, have a lot of other things to be doing. So we are going to be doing a summer institute. These are popular in digital humanities. But instead of doing a sort of week-long intensive training, we're modeling our program, if Melon approves it, on the sort of foreign language training courses that people will do in grad school, where you get 4 to 6 weeks of intensive training on something. Our projects, we are going to be working this coming year, identifying projects from faculty members, 3 to 5 projects that will be worked on in this summer experience. The faculty members will spend portions of the winter semester working on the project descriptions, and then we will have 10 or more graduate students that will come. Will be split into particular teams. They will not necessarily come from the faculty member's background. And then for those 4 weeks, there will be, in the morning, training. Here's how you use the tools or the methods of the digital humanities. In the afternoons, they will be working in project teams to actually carry out the projects. The faculty members may be there. They may not. They will have to play an active role. They could be in Rome still. Because again, we want to come up with a process that will enhance or advance the research questions that matter to faculty members. We don't, and if we can't do that, it's not worth doing. So we're not paying them. We're not saying, hey, we will give you X thousand dollars to come and participate in this. Instead, we're saying we believe we have a program that can help you answer a question about your scholarship, and that will hopefully be worth it to you to participate. So that's one of our new twists. So this is how we're going to be kicking or incubating or slingshotting projects this coming year, we think. We'll find out. Sir?
In addition to the work that you did with the poets, did you ever consider doing text mining to look at further associations among the poets?
So have we ever thought about looking at further associations among the poets? I think we could do that. One of the challenges of working on 20th century poetry is that the copyright problem looms large. And another portion of our collection, we have a very large collection of broadsheets of letterpress poems that were distributed at readings throughout New York in the 60s and 70s. I would love to digitize these, extract the text from them, and create a database that we can search and do big, large-scale text analysis on poems that were being printed and distributed in New York City. So far I've not been able to convince our counsel in the library that I could make this work under copyright law. I think it would be fine if I do not give these poems away, if we just make a database that you can search through but not actually read the poems. That's my argument. I'm not yet been able to convince her of this. So, yes, but we don't have the wherewithal to do it. What I've done in my classes on a small scale is I've had students take volumes of poetry and just write them up. You write up these 4 poems, you write up these 4 poems. Now we all have a corpus to work from, and we can do text analysis and look at other things that are there. But this is a problem that I'm giving a talk in a couple of weeks at UGA about the future of the book. And the future of the book and this sort of work is going to be really murky for the coming future because of the difficulties of copyright, I'm afraid.
Brian, you said something about time is sometimes more of an issue than money, and I tweeted that. And you're getting some pushback. Somebody wants this unpacked because they say time is money. So I'm curious if you can unpack this from the Twitter stream.
So maybe this is true that time is money. Maybe it was time was more important than the amount of money we had. But perhaps even more important than time, I think the other challenge, specifically in digital scholarship, is ideas. One of the things I'm fond of saying is if I give an English professor or a graduate student a poem or a novel, he or she knows what to do with it. They might not like it. They might wish I'd given them a different poem. But they know generally what to do. If I give that same person a poem and a computer, that's a really different, they're not really sure what to do with it. And so having people think about and understand ideas that could be answered effectively with technology is is a big problem of time, because when I started grad school, I'd been writing interpretive essays of poems and stories since at least 7th or 6th grade. I'd had 15 years of practice doing this sort of work. I started doing digital analysis of literature my last year of grad school. And so there's a whole, we have to change the way we train not just graduate students, but undergraduates or secondary school children, like my kids, to think differently about these things. So money is time. Money can be incredibly important, but it's nowhere near, but having the time to get it done, our position is we can't pay you enough to get you to want to do it unless you want to do it and unless it already relates to your research. It's just too expensive, and so we have to make it make sense for you that way.
I'll also point out Fred Brooks's old law: adding more people to a project does not necessarily increase the capacity to complete the project more quickly. It just adds more noise, not necessarily more signal.
Yeah, I think the best thing I learned in project management training was that if you want something done, I'm going to forget it now, that if you want something done faster, you either have to give me more people or more money, or be willing to accept a decrease in quality. And so there are these problems of an ever-growing team. Another project I'm managing right now, where the team is probably 20 different people, and it is really hard in the limited amount of time I have in a 24-hour period to get all 20 of these people coordinating effectively. And again, this is not something that we are very good at teaching people how to do in graduate school. I'm getting a sort of crash course, and people are being very generous in working with me. Lisa?
So you mentioned what is it for me from a lot of different perspectives, and I'm interested to hear you reflect on what is in it for me from the perspective of the university.
So what's in it for the university? Clearly there's some money potentially involved. Traditionally, the humanities have not been a place where people have made grants. Our grant for Mellon was to the tune of $695,000. That's a lot of money to me. It's not a lot of money to my colleagues in the sciences. And so there is some money there, and I think people are rightly skeptical about the long-term reasons to get into digital humanities. I think the real reason for universities is a recognition that digital scholarship, digital approaches to scholarship in the humanities are not going away. It's just a different way to do the work. It's not the only way. I still like to sit down with my students and do close readings of poems. But it's not going away, and whether it's my version of how we're doing it at Emory or it's something else 5 years from now, people will still be doing this sort of work. And so for a university to be engaged, to be, sadly, competing with its peers, you are going to need to be thinking about this. It will be one of the reasons why graduate students choose where they go. In English, every year, we get more and more graduate students at Emory saying they want to do something related to digital humanities. It's what they want to do, or they know enough about the profession to know they should be saying it at this point. So but we, I went to grad school to escape the sort of capitalist grind. Or so I thought, right? My PhD essentially was in Marxism. But universities are rational places too, and helping them understand that there's a reason to be participating insofar as your profile with your peer institutions, and it'd simply be supporting the work of your scholars. Because if you do not support the work that your faculty want to do, the faculty will eventually go someplace else. And the faculty, although sometimes a very small and decreasingly small portion of a university, are really the heart of the university enterprise, and it's important to see them in that role. Last chance before I sit down. Thanks.